They never meant for the public to know. The research was real. But the story was too dangerous. It began in 1979, in a cold, unmarked facility in Eastern Europe. The lead researcher was Dr. Lev Orlov, a theoretical physicist known for his work on quantum field interactions and alternate timelines. At the time, his ideas were dismissed as eccentric. But behind closed doors, a small team was funding him. They were interested not in energy or technology, but in consciousness, and where it went after death. Orlov had a theory that the human mind, under extreme conditions, could access parallel dimensions. Not just metaphorically. Literally. He believed death was not an ending, but a transition of perception. The team began a series of classified experiments. Electromagnetic chambers, brain mapping under altered states. Even the simulation of near-death experiences. They called it Project Mirror. Because Orlov believed consciousness, when isolated from the body, would reflect itself back from a different dimension. In early recordings, volunteers described identical visions. An endless corridor of doors. Soft voices calling them by name. None of this was ever published. The data was too strange, too consistent. And then, one night in March 1982, Orlov disappeared. His lab was intact. No signs of struggle. No travel logs, no messages. But on his desk was a single cassette. On it, his final log. A voice trembling, whispering about crossing thresholds, and the watchers behind the veil. His last words. I'm not leaving. I'm being pulled. And then, silence. After that, the program was shut down. His colleagues resigned or vanished from academia. The tapes, journals, and devices were locked away. For decades, no one spoke of Orlov. The official story was suicide. But no body was ever found. In 2007, a Freedom of Information request accidentally released fragments of the Mirror files. Redacted transcripts of interviews with dying patients. Describing landscapes that didn't exist on Earth. Some mentioned seeing Orlov. A tall man in a white coat. Walking through impossible cities of light. Of course, most dismissed it as delusion. But one line appeared in every document. We are not hallucinating. We are remembering. Physicists today know more than they're allowed to say. Parallel universes are no longer fiction. They're mathematical necessities in advanced quantum theory. The problem is, consciousness doesn't stay where it's expected. It jumps. It shifts when we're under stress, near death, or deep in trance. And according to Orlov's notes, it can be trained. It can be launched. What terrified his colleagues was not the science. It was that he might have succeeded. That he didn't vanish, he transitioned. Some believe Orlov discovered the threshold point. A vibrational frequency. That separates one reality from another. He was trying to test it on volunteers. But in the end, he tested it on himself. Since then, similar disappearances have been recorded. Always researchers. Always people obsessed with consciousness. The official narrative says they cracked under pressure. But others, quietly, have started to ask. What if they went somewhere? Some physicists today refer to Orlov's window. A theoretical gap in spacetime. That might open during extreme altered states. They don't teach this in universities. But behind the curtain of mainstream science, this story never died. Because Orloff's last hypothesis, the one they buried, claimed something no one was ready to accept. That death is not disappearance. It is relocation. And what we call the end is just a shift in observation. For most of human history, death was the final border. A door that closed without return. But what if it's not a door at all, but a hallway? In recent decades, physicists and neuroscientists have been forced to revisit the question they once left to mystics. What happens to consciousness after death? And the answers have shaken their foundations. What began as research into near-death experiences turned into something else entirely. Patients who were clinically dead, no brain activity, no heartbeat, returned with astonishingly detailed accounts. Not dreams. Not fading lights. But worlds. Cities. Encounters. They described environments more coherent than waking life. Structures made of vibration. Landscapes that responded to thought. And most disturbingly, they often described the same places. People who had never met reported identical experiences. A luminous field. A barrier they were not allowed to cross. Sometimes, a figure watching them. This consistency forced researchers to reconsider the nature of consciousness. If it were just a byproduct of the brain, how could it retain such clarity after the brain had shut down? Then came the data from quantum biology. Researchers found microtubules in brain cells that might function as quantum processors. These structures, small beyond imagination, could theoretically sustain entanglement, meaning they might store consciousness outside space and time. One physicist described them as antennas for the soul. Not metaphoric. Literal. A system capable of transmitting identity beyond the body. In 2014, a team at the University of Arizona recorded electromagnetic anomalies at the moment of death in terminal patients. The patterns didn't fade. They shifted, as if moving through another field. That's when Orloff's journals were quietly revisited. His theory was no longer absurd. It was plausible. Consciousness does not break. It jumps from one probability into another. Modern interpretations suggest that what we call death is simply a shift in the observer's frame of reference. You don't disappear, you awaken elsewhere. This matches the Everett interpretation of quantum mechanics. The idea that every possibility exists, and we only experience the path we're tuned to. So what happens when the body dies? The tuning shifts. The station changes. But the song, your identity, your presence, continues. Some physicists refer to it now as the observer effect of death. That the collapse of the physical body doesn't end the observer, it repositions it. And what's more shocking? Some of those who returned describe bringing knowledge with them. They speak of timelines, of choices never made, being lived elsewhere, of seeing versions of loved ones they had not met in life. It forced researchers to consider the possibility that we live not one life, but many, layered across the spectrum of potential. And that death is not the loss of life, but the movement between lives, between versions. Some scientists resist this. But even they now admit the evidence no longer supports finality. Instead, it supports continuity. Through dimensions we don't yet fully understand. Through realms once dismissed as fantasy. Many of the old esoteric traditions said this from the start. That death is illusion. That the soul walks on. But now, what was once spiritual doctrine is becoming scientific hypothesis. Dr. J. Hellman, a theoretical physicist from Geneva, recently wrote in a private paper, "There is no evidence that consciousness ends with death. Only that it relocates." He's not the only one. Neuroscientists working in end-of-life care have begun to speak of post-transition activity. They describe shifts in brainwave fields that seem to move out, not down. Like a frequency departing, not decaying. We are watching the edges of science bend toward the mystical. Not because of belief, but because of data. And for the first time, researchers are starting to whisper what mystics have always known: that we do not die. We move. And where we go might depend entirely on who we are. By now, the idea of parallel realities is no longer fringe. It's embedded in physics, and whispered in the hallways of institutions that once mocked it. The multiverse is not theory anymore, it's a structure. A map with infinite branches, each one holding a version of you. And within that structure, death has a very different meaning. It's not the end of being, it's a transfer of position. Like moving from one corridor to another in a vast, conscious architecture. Not with your body, but with your point of awareness. This changes everything. Not just how we view death, but how we view life itself. If you don't truly end, then every moment is a doorway. Every state you enter is a portal. And in that context, death is not punishment or failure. It's a sacred technology. One that moves you forward when this particular level has revealed all it could. One that honors experience, not erases it. Some physicists now call this continuity of consciousness transfer. It's the idea that the mind continues in a reality where the you did not die. Think about that. The moment you die in one world, you wake up in another where you survived. You might not even realize it. Reality flows so smoothly that the jump feels like continuation. Some call this quantum immortality. But it's more than that. It's narrative migration. Your story never stops. It just keeps branching. And death becomes a transition point, not a terminus. This terrifies some. But for others, it's the most liberating idea ever encountered. It means nothing is truly lost. It means your loved ones, when they pass, might continue just beyond the edge of your current perception. It means that grief is real. But it's not the whole story. Because the soul doesn't end. It relocates. What does that say about our place in this universe? What does it say about the nature of identity? If you exist in 1,000 forms at once? The ancient mystics said, you are not the body. You are the field that moves through form. Now, physicists are beginning to echo that. Not out of mysticism, but out of raw data. Orloff was just the beginning. Since his disappearance, Others have attempted similar experiments. Quiet programs. Unpublished findings. Patterns that repeat. People who die. And then return, changed. With information they shouldn't have. Some describe being taught. Others speak of choosing their next life. Some carry vivid memories of cities we cannot find on any map. It's no longer enough to laugh it off. When patterns emerge across disciplines, you investigate. And what the patterns show is a web of interconnected realities, each shaped by choice, perception, and vibration. So what is the role of death in all this? It's a shift point. A handover. It allows the soul to move to a different frequency. To learn differently. To experience what it couldn't hear. It breaks the illusion of permanence. It reminds us that life is a flow, not a wall. And science, the most rigid of all human systems, is beginning to bend toward this truth. Esoteric knowledge is no longer just ancient. It's experimental. It's measurable. The veil is thinning. And what we once called mystery is now simply next-level physics. Soon, the line between mystic and scientist will dissolve. Because they are asking the same question. Where do we go when we no longer go here? And the answer may be: we go where we already are. We awaken where our soul has always existed.